keeping true to my undergraduate USA education, I thought I'd come down from the floor because it's more democratic like that. I am a political scientist, which means I'm not a legal scholar, which means I am perhaps, political science could be characterized as the younger brother, the more aggressive brother and the more realistic brother of law. Let's see the first slide. So keeping true to that, my dissertation, which I, fingers crossed, submitted 2.5 years from the start of my program, so I'm close to the end, hopefully, concerns the democratic deficit of the European Union and the Eurozone crisis. And it's very simple, it deals with two things: the supranational level, i.e. the EU level, and then the national level, i.e. Greece. Obviously, the presentation is going to be much, much more limited to the effect of the structural adjustment programs, which is the million-dollar phrase, okay? Structural adjustment programs. And their effect on the Greek business environment. But I'll be happy to take any questions for any Eurozone issues as well. So I thought, how would you estimate from a political science point of view, right? Because I'm not a legal scholar and I'm not an economist either. Maybe a political economist, but that could be a stretch. So how would you go about it? So the first thing you have to do is you have to introduce yourself, which is the introduction. But the second thing you have to do is you have to evaluate the temporal aspect of the crisis, okay? So what happened and when? And what were the consequences of what was happening? And surprising as it is, you can discover a great amount of information and great amount of detail when you actually sit down and look at what happened. I mean, obviously these things have been told over and over again, but no one really looks. You know, everyone takes it for granted. This is what happened then, this is what happened then. No one really looks at what actually happened. And the second part, keeping true to the espousement I share with the legal scholars in the attention to detail, is a document analysis, right? I'm Greek, I share the legal scholars' attention to detail, so I have to look at documents, right? It's a Greek tradition almost. And then I evaluate the impact, okay? So 1, the time, 2, what has been written, and then what the impact is. Let's go ahead. Okay, so the Eurozone crisis, I'll go through it very quickly. I'll go through these very quickly. The Eurozone crisis firstly occurred as across the Atlantic. It started as a subprime mortgage crisis, okay? So credit was cheap. Banks started giving out subprimes and alternative A-paper mortgages, yada, 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 economics 101, okay? The bubble bursts in 2007 and 8. Now, what most people do not realize is that the first country to implement austerity within the Eurozone was Ireland. Because Ireland had the same exposure to subprime mortgages, or a similar type of exposure, such as the United States did. So they moved to guarantee 400 billion euros, all their bank loans, they moved to guarantee them and introduced austerity. Now, the issue didn't receive broad attention at the time because no one thought that the Eurozone was ever going to suffer from a crisis, okay? People thought this was a possibility that would never happen. And I won't go into the issue unless I'm asked whether it's an optimal currency area, whether an optimal currency area is possible, et cetera, I won't go into that. So, in 2008, that happened, and then the first 3 countries, yeah, just go ahead, just, oh, wow, okay, you can't see that, but okay. So the first 3 countries to resort to EU and IMF assistance were actually outside the Eurozone. That's also another fact that no one really mentions, okay? It was Hungary, Latvia, and Romania. Now, as you can imagine, being outside the Eurozone, and because of the specific provision in EU treaties that they can receive financial assistance, EU member states, not Eurozone member states, no one, again, really cared. You know, there were the Central and Eastern European countries, former Soviet republics, you know, economics were a little bit dodgy, introduction into the more liberal economy of the West caused many problems. So what if they asked assistance? So what if they signed an MoU? So that was the beginning of the crisis, which later followed with 5 Eurozone member states, the first of which you know very well was Greece, which also received a second loan afterwards, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and then Cyprus. We can go ahead. Okay, so the Greek crisis. Once again, very quickly, 2004, 2007, New Democracy administration plagued with scandals. I dare to imagine, I'm afraid to imagine, if any other government that was plagued by so many scandals, consecutive scandals, political scandals, at the time, okay? You have Siemens AG, the communications sector of Siemens AG. You have catastrophic fires in the summer of 2007. You have the Vatopedi. Okay, so this tension is building up. Ministers are resigning. Parliamentary committees are being convened. Blah, blah, blah. Everyone is like fed up with this. And then on top of everything else, you have the crisis, okay? So the crisis hits, boom. So after 2 consecutive terms, they call for snap elections. Snap elections happen. New Democracy, we're going to cut wages. PASOK, no, no, no. We'll give you wage raises above inflation. We shouldn't cut wages. Where are the people going to go? They were already so fed up with all the political turmoil that New Democracy suffered. And one political actor was telling them, we're going to cut wages. Another political actor was telling them, we're going to give you money, essentially. So they voted for PASOK, okay? October 2009. So they get elected. Once they get elected, whoops, 1 week within their election, the prime minister and then the minister for finance comes out and says, oh, we're sorry. Yeah, we were going to give you money, but the previous administration underestimated our deficit. So it's going to be a little bit more than 6%. It's going to be 12. Double. Economic death. Okay? Desolation of the Greek economy. Obviously, the credit rating agencies were not really Greece's friends, sometimes rightfully so, because their economy is not very good. CRAs downgrade the economy to trash, okay? Immediate credit crunch. No one can borrow. Banks cannot borrow. The state cannot borrow. Boom. That's the beginning of the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis, okay? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. So, in 2009, that's what happened, revised the deficit, etc., etc. In 2010, a first law of austerity is introduced, but that's a mediocre, that's like a patch at best, okay? So, in May 2010, the Prime Minister says, oh, I'm sorry, you know, I was going to do all these good things, but now I can't because, you know, the markets won't allow it. So I have to ask for assistance. That was the first time a Eurozone member state ever asked assistance, all right? And more tragic was the fact that it asked assistance from the IMF as well. As you probably are aware, the International Monetary Fund does not see eye to eye with the European Central Bank on what's the best policy, right? It's Washington-based. That's why it wasn't a very ideal request for assistance. But as it turned out later, Germany insisted on the IMF participating because of its extensive experience in bailing out countries. Austerity, the MoUs, tremendous policy drift, okay? 180-degree turn. People did not know where the changes were coming from, okay? They were in a constant state of vertigo. Everything changed within one night. Everything. Every single piece of legislation that the Greek state had for years changed immediately. And we'll see how. So, okay, so in 2007, the money is not enough. So they say, all right, we'll go to the second agreement. Again. But obviously, the government of PASOK could not really implement the measures because of tremendous protests that happened across 2010 and 11. People did not like what was proposed, mainly because the internal devaluation that was happening was awful for the people. So he couldn't implement it, said, okay, well, this is what I'll do. I'll resign, and then I'll agree with the other parties in parliament to assign a temporary government to implement the second agreement, or the second loan, and then we'll have elections. And so it happened. In between happened a tremendous announcement for a referendum, which was shocking. And so in July 2011, the second agreement, and in October, the referendum comes on. Let's go ahead. And then the second MOU in March 2012 under the cooperation government of Dr. Papadimos. Elections in April, no government wins, but huge rise at the left, Syriza, which had 4% and now had I don't know, 20%. Huge rise in Golden Dawn, right? Okay, so politics 101, okay? So in crisis periods, the people, citizens, voters move to the edges, okay? No government, repeat elections, as one would expect, repeat elections, the first two parties, so New Democracy and Syriza, have a boost because people feel uncertain. And a cooperation government between New Democracy and PASOK and Dimar is formed after the second elections, right? Again, New Democracy had run on an electoral platform that was somewhat anti-MoU, at least anti-MoU policy mix, and it was also anti-austerity, all right? So growth, et cetera, et cetera. Gets elected, oh, policy drift again. I'm sorry, 4 minutes, all right. Oh, we have to go quickly, okay. So I'm sorry, so and then 2015 general elections. So the structural adjustment, two parts. Yeah, just go ahead, yeah. The one part is the excessive deficit procedure, okay? So the excessive deficit procedure is an EU-based instrument. And a lot of people don't realize that, but the excessive deficit procedure came before the MoUs and had exactly the same measures. Exactly. Very soon, though, the European partners realized, probably, don't take me to the bank for it, but they realized that conditionality was low because the excessive deficit procedure, as you all know, as an EU treaty procedure, does not have strong sanctions. So they said, okay, we'll do a loan agreement and MoU as well, which is the IMF's tool, all right? So the loan agreements are those you see right there. By the way, these data do not exist anywhere in the form that I'm showing them, so I'd appreciate if you didn't steal them. All right, let's go ahead. And the memorandums of understanding, okay? 20 memorandums of understanding in total. 2 major ones, and then 18 updates. Now people say updates, you know, that's like changing the name. No, no, it's not really. You know, they put the one out, and then everything else, they change everything else in the updates. It's shocking. They add things and they retract things. Let's go ahead. These are the areas that impact the business environment: budget, revenue, energy, labor market, healthcare, education, tourism. Essentially, every policy in the Greek state changed, right, with the MoUs. Transportation, social security, banks, procurement, research and development, and privatization, all right? And there is also a very, very detailed privatization schedule for each quarter, by the way, all right? These are, well, you can't see that, but these are the pages of the MoUs that reference each of these changes. Let's go ahead. These are the Greek laws that enforced all the changes, okay? Because many people say, oh, you know, this argument has been heard time and again. Say, oh, you know, we committed to that, but we didn't really implement it. Yeah, no, they did. It just, no one really looks at what goes through Parliament, okay? So all the changes, I can guarantee you, every single one that affected the Greek business environment was actually passed as a Greek law. So, what were the measures? Increase VAT, so value-added tax, right? Increase taxes, presumptive taxation for the self-employed, firm-level agreements over the sectoral level, reduction of minimum wages, no restricted professions, which is one commitment we haven't implemented yet, reduction of domestic investment, crisis levy in firms, and reduction of heavy and arduous profession. And these are just the categories that I chose to show in the presentation. The Greek business environment after the MoUs didn't exist. It was desolated. So, the conclusion. First of all, the political climate, uncertain. No one really knew what was happening. It still is, by the way. Who's going to come and invest in a country that no one knows what's going to happen? And I'm not saying, you know, the argument that, oh, who's going to come and invest in a country that has a left government or a right government? It doesn't matter. Just commit to a single solution and be done with it. This going back and forth has, the entire country for 5 years has reached a stalemate. Nothing is moving, nothing. It's just outside negotiations with partners. And this legislation passes and things have changed and no one really knows what to do. So that's one. Policy drift, another. 3 governments from 2008-9 until now, none of them kept to their electoral commitments, including this one, right? None of them. Temporal aspect. The legislation passed was not given enough time for deliberation. Okay, no deliberation, no social partners, inclusion. No inclusion, how are you going to implement the measures? These measures were decided, were brought to Parliament for 2 days. No one read them because it was each bill was 500 pages long, and no one really had any input on that. So they said, okay, so sectoral level agreements, we're done with that. We'll do firm level agreements. Fine, did you consult with anyone? How are you going to implement the measure? No one knew. That's why people went on the streets time and again, time and again. The magnitude of the austerity implemented was tremendous. I mean, if you read the memorandums, every single policy aspect of the Greek state is mandated to be changed within these documents. Every one. I mean, from healthcare to education. And the reforms were in depth. They fundamentally changed the way the Greek state worked. And there was also lack of consideration. I mean, these reforms were not very well accommodated to the Greek status quo, okay? I mean, this is a country which has a strong social democracy tradition, so it's very difficult to implement such hard austerity. So in short, the business sector, dead. Uncertainty, fundamental changes, constant changes, changes that were not fitted for businesses in this country, death. Thank you very much.